My head hurts. Fang Zheng opened his eyes and stared blankly at the starry sky in front of him. What is this place? He turned his head and looked to both sides, but all he saw were broken wooden boards. He could even hear the squeaking of wheels and the hurried sound of hooves. Ugh! The stinging pain in his head made Fang Zheng groan. He closed his eyes and began to carefully recall everything that happened before. If Fang Zheng remembered correctly, he was still out on a mission, and then, "Young master, are you awake, young master?" While Fang Zheng was deep in thought, an old man suddenly appeared beside him. It was an old man with white hair and a beard. He wore a tattered leather armor and carried a long sword on his back. This get-up was so odd that it left Fang Zheng somewhat dumbfounded. But what was even more strange was that the old man spoke in a language that he had never heard before. But for some reason, Fang Zheng felt like he could completely understand what the old man was saying. But even so, the doubts in Fang Zheng's heart were still not eliminated. Who is he? Why is he calling me young master? Who am I? Ugh! Ah! Just as Fang Zheng was about to recall carefully, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his brain. Fang Zheng could not help but hold his head with both hands and cry out in pain. Seeing Fang Zheng in this state, the old man panicked even more. He hurried to Fang Zheng and pressed hard on his shoulder. "Young master, are you okay? Don't scare me." I. Hearing the old man's anxious shouts, Fang Zheng could not say anything. He had a splitting headache, and the scene in front of him began to distort. But soon, Fang Zheng saw a blue glow unfold in front of him, forming a very familiar and unique interface. Then, a soft voice rang in his ear. "Interface activation complete. System startup. Soul wavelength detected. Beginning authentication." Ugh! Ah! At this moment, Fang Zheng not only felt a headache, but even his body felt as if he had been placed in a slaughterhouse and was having his tendons pulled out and his skin peeled off. His blood was flowing in reverse, and his breathing became rapid. His heart was beating so violently that it felt like it was going to jump out of his throat. The only thing Fang Zheng could do at this moment was to instinctively clench his fists and grit his teeth, enduring everything that had suddenly befallen him. "Master Carter, those people are catching up. Damn it! Hurry up and take the young master away. We'll stay. Be careful." Boom! Fang Zheng could vaguely hear the noise and screams outside, but before he could react, he suddenly heard a violent explosion. In the next moment, Fang Zheng felt himself losing his balance. He was thrown out of the carriage like a ball and fell heavily to the ground. Peft! Fang Zheng felt his back hit the ground hard. The violent impact even slightly dispelled the pain that was enough to burn his body. And it was precisely because of this that he barely regained control of his body. Fang Zheng turned his head and looked around. At this moment, all he could see was a wilderness shrouded in darkness. Beside him, a carriage was burning in flames, and the horse responsible for pulling the carriage had also been burnt to a crisp. Not far away, Fang Zheng could vaguely see a few figures fighting. They looked like a group of servants, and their enemies were wearing silver-white armor like knights in games. What the hell is this place? Although the warriors seemed to be working hard, even Fang Zheng could see that they were no match for the enemies. In just a few rounds, the warriors were mercilessly beheaded by the knights in silver-white armor and turned into corpses. "Young master, go! Get out of here!" At this moment, only the old man was still waving his sword and struggling to hold on. At the same time, he shouted at Fang Zheng, "Escape!" Up until now, Fang Zheng didn't know what he had encountered, but he knew very well that it was best for him to leave this place now. But his body couldn't move as Fang Zheng wished. For some reason, he only felt that his muscles were extremely sore and he didn't have a trace of strength left in his body. Just supporting his body was already exhausting. Even standing up had become an extravagant hope. Soul wavelength authentication successful. Binding complete. Please activate the codex. The voice in his ear was neither fast nor slow. Along with this voice, Fang Zheng saw a strange and complicated circle appear in the middle of the strange interface in front of him. It looked like a magic circle, but according to Fang Zheng's experience, This interface seemed unusually familiar. Ah! Hearing the scream, Fang Zheng raised his head blankly. He saw that the old man's chest had been pierced by a knight in silver armor. The old man turned to look at him in despair and stretched out his hand. Young! But before the old man could finish his words, a silver light flashed. The next moment, Fang Zheng watched as the old man's head fell to the ground, followed by his body. Then the knights turned around and walked towards him. I'll die. Although the knights were wearing helmets and Fang Zheng couldn't see their faces at all, Fang Zheng could feel the cold killing intent surrounding them. Just feeling the gaze of these knights made Fang Zheng feel as if his neck was about to be cut off. But he couldn't resist at all. Is this the only way? Looking at the strange magic circle in front of him, Fang Zheng gritted his teeth. He stretched out his hand, trying to click on the strange circle. Thud! But before Fang Zheng could raise his hand, an iron boot stepped heavily on Fang Zheng's hand. Ugh! Feeling the excruciating pain from his palm, Fang Zheng let out a muffled groan. But before he could react, another knight grabbed his hair and lifted his head. Is that him? The knight's voice was cold and indifferent, like a completely emotionless machine. Hearing the knight's question, a figure in a black robe standing not far behind the knight nodded slightly. That's him. The secret treasure must be with him. Very well. After getting the answer from the black robe, the leading knight nodded, then suddenly swung his sword and placed it in front of Fang Zheng's neck. Hand over the secret treasure, and I'll give you a quick death. Secret treasure? What secret treasure? Feeling the cold touch of the sword on his neck, Fang Zheng stared blankly at the knight in front of him. His mind was in a mess. He had no idea what was going on, nor did he know what kind of situation he was in. The only thing he knew was that he was being chased by this group of people, and the reason they were chasing him was to find some secret treasure. But what secret treasure was it? How would I know? I can only fight. With this thought in mind, Fang Zheng gritted his teeth. He lowered his head and stared at his right hand that was stepped on by the knight. Sensing Fang Zheng's gaze, the knight also looked at his feet, then instinctively took a step back. Now's the time. The moment he felt the knight step back, Fang Zheng immediately retracted his right hand and quickly tapped on the circle in front of him. Soon, following his movements, the circle began to spin rapidly, and the light gradually gathered in front of Fang Zheng. It emerged and turned into a huge, heavy, and dazzling holy Bible. What's this? At this moment, the knights also saw the holy book that appeared in front of Fang Zheng. They stepped back in surprise, holding their swords in their hands, not knowing what to do. On the contrary, Black Robe was very excited. He jumped up almost immediately and shouted loudly, "This must be a secret treasure. Don't let him activate the secret treasure. Kill him." Hearing Black Robe's order, the leading knight immediately raised his sword and swung it down at Fang Zheng. At the same time, as if he was being summoned, Fang Zheng also stretched out his hand and pressed it on the book. Then, the world in front of him shattered like glass in an instant. "Child, when you were born, the forest of Lordaeron whispered your name." An old voice echoed in Fang Zheng's mind. What appeared before his eyes were towering mountains and lofty ridges, rich and beautiful cities, towns and wilderness. "Child, I proudly watched you grow up day by day and become the embodiment of justice." The burning flames engulfed the entire city, and all that was once filled with cheers and laughter was now nothing but ruins and ruins. The incessant blazing scarlet was like fresh blood that illuminated the entire world, bringing about endless destruction and hatred. "You must remember, we have always ruled this country with wisdom and strength." The dancing petals in the sky turned into cold snowflakes, and the former followers fell one by one. In the dark, gloomy cave, a long sword shining with a blue light was quietly inserted into the ground, waiting for its wielder to descend. "I also believe that you will use your great power carefully." The howling blizzard shrouded everything. The trees withered, and the earth was covered with ice. The living stayed away from everything. Only the undead moaned in pain as they walked out of the flames and darkness. They became an army, a terrifying force that could make all things tremble in fear before the shadow of death. They roared forward, tearing apart all obstacles in front of them, bringing only blood and death. Fang Zheng opened his eyes again. The illusion from before had disappeared. In front of him, the sharp blade of the knight was slashing at him. He could even see his own reflection on the silver blade. But the voice still echoed in his mind. One day, my life will come to an end, and you will be crowned king. Kill him. The Argent Knight strode forward. The sharp sword in his hand flashed like a crescent moon as it slashed down at Fang Zheng. He was sure that his strike would not deviate from its target. He would be able to cut off the young man's head in an instant. But, clang! With the crisp sound of metal clashing, the Argent Knight's sword was suspended in mid-air. His eyes widened in surprise as he watched the young man in front of him raise his right hand. In the young man's hand, the overflowing cold air gradually condensed into a beautiful and frightening sword. On the sword hilt, which was as dark as the night, a strange skull stared at him. The sword, which looked like white bones and snow, emitted a chill that penetrated deep into the soul. A faint blue light emerged from the groove on the sword. Even with just a glance, it was enough to tell that the sword was no ordinary weapon. What's that? That must be a secret treasure, the Argent Knights shouted when they saw the sword that suddenly appeared in Fang Zheng's hand. Black Robe, on the other hand, stared at everything in front of him. He suddenly felt that something was not quite right. Wait, something's not right. Be careful. Before Black Robe's voice trailed off, Fang Zheng, who was half kneeling on the ground, suddenly jumped up. He held the sword with both hands, raised it high, and swung it forward. In the next moment, the sword pierced into the Silver Knight's body without any fuss. Ah! The Silver Knight let out a blood-curdling screech. His body shriveled rapidly and a spiritual radiance shone from within. Then, a blurry figure emerged from the Silver Knight's body as though pulled by an unknown force. Then, the figure swirled and was sucked into the blade of the sword. Boom! At that moment, a roaring wind suddenly erupted with Fang Zheng as the center. The swirling cold air blew away all the other Argent Knights who rushed forward. As for the black-robed man, he hurriedly retreated a few meters away, barely managing to resist the burst of cold air. When the storm disappeared, he once again looked forward. Then his mouth was wide open, and he was dumbfounded. This is... In front of the crowd, Fang Zheng was no longer in a miserable state. An ice-cold chill spread out from his body and turned into a silver-white armor. Above his head, a huge phantom appeared out of thin air. It was an existence wearing a crown and its face was hidden in the shadows. Just like that, he sat on the throne that seemed to be formed from 10,000-year-old ice, staring coldly at the enemy before him. Just being stared at by his gaze gave people the illusion that even their souls were frozen. Perhaps it wasn't an illusion. At this moment, with Fang Zheng as the center, the ground around him was gradually covered in frost. Flowers and trees began to wither, as if all life was about to end. What terrifying death energy! Seeing this scene, Black Robe's expression changed drastically. He hurriedly retreated, then took out a rune from his pocket and held it in his hand. But before he could take the next step, Fang Zheng seemed to have noticed his existence. He turned his head to look at Black Robe in front of him, raised his sword and pointed at Black Robe. Whoosh! In just an instant, Black Robe's whole body was completely frozen by the sudden appearance of ice. His movement was still at the moment when he held the rune, as if time had stopped at this moment. But soon, from Black Robe's body, a vague human figure flew out, screaming, and was sucked into the sword in Fang Zheng's hand. Evil undead creature! How dare you blaspheme souls? Seeing this scene in front of them, the other Silver Knights were shocked and angry. They looked at each other and raised the swords in their hands. Divine blessing! Along with the knights' roars, a soft light emerged from their bodies, illuminating the originally dark wilderness. But to Fang Zheng it didn't seem to be of any use. The cold wind of Northrend shall devour your souls. He turned his head to look at the knights in front of him and muttered to himself. Along with Fang Zheng's words, the whistling cold wind suddenly intensified, forming an invisible wall that enveloped the Silver Knights. At the same time, the ground cracked, and skeletons crawled out. They might have been warriors who fought on this land, or they might just be civilians buried in the wilderness. But now, the ice-cold blue flames burning in their eye sockets revealed their identities. Fight him! Let's go! May the goddess be with us! Looking at the increasing number of undead creatures in front of them, the Silver Knights' faces turned ashen. They felt the power of death assaulting their faces, and they knew that they definitely weren't a match for this powerful force. But now they had no way out. In that case, they could only fight to the death. He can't use the power of that secret treasure indefinitely. Everyone, let's go! Along with a roar, the remaining Silver Knights raised their swords and pounced on Fang Zheng. They roared and raised their weapons. A dazzling brilliance erupted from their swords. The swords in their hands seemed to turn into pillars of light. The Silver Knights roared in unison and slashed at Fang Zheng. Boom! The pure white light condensed at that moment, forming a unique and mysterious rune. Following that, the light gradually dissipated. Following that, a gigantic sword nearly 10 meters long descended from the sky, whistling as it stabbed at Fang Zheng. At that moment, the huge phantom above Fang Zheng's head finally moved. But that's it, the phantom muttered to himself. Then he stood up abruptly, drew his sword from his waist, and faced the descending sword of light head-on. Shortly after, the sword in his hand collided with the sword of light. Kacha! There was only a soft sound. In the next moment, the huge sword of light broke like a matchstick, shattered, and turned into fragments that disappeared into the air. At the same time, the shining blades in the hands of the Silver Knights also broke. They spat out a mouthful of blood, flew backward, and fell to the ground. This is impossible. Looking at the disappearing lightsaber in the sky, the Silver-White Knights were dumbfounded. They had never thought that their greatest reliance would be so vulnerable. What the hell was that thing? But they didn't get an answer to their question, because at this moment, the boundless coldness had enveloped their bodies. They could feel their blood stop flowing, and their hearts gradually slowed down. Then, they could only watch in despair as the shadow of death descended upon them. Then it silently devoured their souls. Bang! It wasn't until the last wisp of soul light disappeared that Fang Zheng knelt on the ground. The armor on his body gradually dissipated, and the mysterious and terrifying sword in his hand once again turned into a cold wind and disappeared into the air. Above his head, the gigantic phantom stared at him motionlessly. Then, it merged with the darkness of the night and disappeared without a trace. Ha! Ha! On the cold ground, Fang Zheng gasped for breath. He looked at the dark starry sky in front of him, his mind in a mess. To be honest, even now, Fang Zheng didn't know what happened to him and why he became like this. However, there was one thing he was very clear about, and that was he had survived. Although he didn't know exactly what was going on, he survived in the end. I have to get out of here as soon as possible. After a while, Fang Zheng, who had caught his breath, stood up again and looked around. There were corpses everywhere. The followers who protected him before were dead, and so were the knights who came to kill him. The chill in the air was dissipating, and in the distance, he could even hear a few vague wolf howls. Sensing all this, Fang Zheng couldn't help but shiver. He didn't know where these people came from, but he was sure that if the companions of the knights found out that they were missing, they would definitely come here to look for them. If he didn't leave now, he might never be able to leave again. He had to leave. The night passed. When the light of the morning sun appeared on the other side of the horizon, Fang Zheng finally sorted out the memories in his mind and figured out the cause and effect of the matter. First of all, he was indeed dead. This made Fang Zheng speechless. Fang Zheng had always thought of himself as a cautious person. He was always prepared to deal with all kinds of unexpected risks. From breaking up with his girlfriend to the bankruptcy of his company, from the lack of capital flow to his partner running away with the money, from being robbed and murdered by robbers to meeting a drunk driver while crossing the road. All kinds of risks and possible accidents would be considered by Fang Zheng one by one and dealt with accordingly. He liked this kind of life where everything was under control. Fang Zheng's philosophy of life had always been unchanged, and it was precisely because of this that he could have today's success. But what Fang Zheng didn't expect was that the world was always so wonderful and full of all kinds of accidents that he couldn't imagine. For example, when he jumped into the river to save someone, Fang Zheng didn't think that he would successfully rescue the person and watch the person get into the ambulance and be hit by a high-voltage wire that suddenly broke above his head. And what he didn't expect was that not only did he die, but when he opened his eyes again, he found that he had been reborn into another world. Fang Zheng was rendered speechless by what had happened to the owner of the body he had been reborn into. To put it bluntly, the matter wasn't complicated at all. The small noble he was staying in had a secret treasure, and not long ago, a group of knights from the Holy Kingdom found this small noble and claimed that the secret treasure passed down in his family was an evil and ominous existence. They demanded that he hand over the secret treasure. Of course, the small noble was unwilling to do so, and directly drove the group of knights away. Originally, the small noble didn't think much about it, but what he didn't expect was that on the night they were driven away, the group of knights raided their manor and started a massacre. And this small noble named Williams was just a small knight, so he had never seen such a scene before. Naturally, he was so scared that he immediately ran away with his family's secret treasure. Originally, he had hoped to enter the city to seek help from other noble families. But he learned that the Kingdom of Saint had publicly announced that the Williams family had colluded with a cult and was regarded as an enemy of order. The country of Saint had a venerable status on this continent, and a small noble like Williams was just a small fry. Naturally, he couldn't be compared to them. In desperation, they could only continue to flee, but they did not expect that they would not be able to escape the pursuit of the country of saints and eventually die here. If Fang Zheng were to look at it from a third-person perspective, he would undoubtedly think that the country of Saint was the kind of people who looked righteous on the surface, but had a belly full of thieves and prostitutes who liked to play with little boys. But after absorbing the memory of this little noble, Fang Zheng gloomily discovered that the order of the Holy Church to kill him was not wrong at all. According to William's memories, his family believed in the goddess of order on the surface, but in reality, they were devout believers of a sect called Day of Destruction. This sect believed in the end of all things. They claimed that one day all things in the world would be destroyed, and even the gods would fall. When that time came, the god of destruction would resurrect and rule the world. What the believers of this sect had to do was to weaken the power of the lackeys of order as much as possible, and wait for the return of the god of destruction, and so on and so forth. And of course, the Williams family had to do some dirty and dark things in the dark. In Fang Zheng's opinion, even if the country of Saint did not enforce justice on behalf of heaven, according to the laws of his world, this family would be dragged out and executed 100 times. How did I reincarnate into such a person? With this in mind, Fang Zheng felt his head ache. Others had either transmigrated into a character with a blood feud or a protagonist with a hidden attribute. Why had he transmigrated into the body of a heretic that everyone wanted to beat up? What was even more depressing was that after absorbing William's memories, Fang Zheng helplessly discovered that not only had he become a wanted criminal in the country of Saint, he could not even stay in the Day of Destruction sect anymore. The reason was very simple. According to William's memories, the so-called secret treasure of the sect had been destroyed by him while he was escaping. The process of the secret treasure being destroyed was not even worth mentioning. Facing the pursuers of the country of Saint, Williams planned to activate the secret treasure in a desperate attempt to injure both sides. In the end, it was unknown whether there was a problem with the specific steps or he was just unlucky. But when Williams poured his magic into the secret treasure, it shattered with a bang. Williams immediately fainted. Then it was Fang Zheng's turn. Serves you right to be hunted for the rest of your life. Fang Zheng imagined that if he was found by the people of the Day of Destruction sect, and he could not take out the secret treasure, he would really be dead. It was the same for cults no matter which world they were in. They had all kinds of tortures, and they would make you wish you were dead. Thinking about it this way, maybe it would be better to be caught by the country of Saint. At least they would give you a quick death. Not only that, through William's memories, Fang Zheng also learned that this was a world with a very developed power system. In this world, There were not only magic, knights, but also dragons, the undead, and all kinds of monsters and existences. Not to mention gods and oracles. Unlike the religions in Fang Zheng's world that specialized in swindling people with lies, the religions here really had people above them. In contrast, although Fang Zheng himself was a little capable, in the face of magic and those godly swordsmanship, he felt that he was absolutely not enough. As for this reborn body, Fang Zheng already knew that this Williams only had the strength of an apprentice knight. The Day of Destruction sect he believed in did not give him any divine blessing or anything like that. If there were no accidents, the knights that Fang Zheng saw before could beat 10 of him. Fortunately, this world lacked many things, but it didn't lack accidents. Thinking of this, Fang Zheng raised his hand. Along with his action, the gorgeous, heavy book from before appeared again. Only then did Fang Zheng carefully observe the big book that appeared out of thin air in his hand. It looked as thick as a dictionary, but in Fang Zheng's hands, it was unexpectedly as light as a goose feather. On the thick black cover, a luxurious gem shining with colorful brilliance could be seen embedded in the center. With this gem as the center, silver circles spread out in all directions, as if the orbits of planets in the universe had unfolded. Opening the book, Fang Zheng saw his name at the top of the page. There was a groove in the middle, in which a beautiful white gem was inlaid. A cold mist surrounded the surface of the gem, giving it a cold feeling. At the bottom of the interface, there were 3 options: summon, enhance, and teleport. This was the system that Fang Zheng obtained after coming to this world. Dimensional code, and most importantly, this was the game system that Fang Zheng designed before his rebirth. Looking at the familiar cover, Fang Zheng couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Previously, he was only guessing, but now he was sure that this was the system that he developed and created. This was a new mobile game that was still in development, called Dimensional Code. In this game, the player was a young man with a self-determined gender and a self-selected avatar. According to the game settings, the player would be drawn into the turbulence of time and space for some reason. After waking up, they would find themselves in a brand new world. Here, the player would encounter a big book called Dimensional Code and start their new journey. In the game, after obtaining the dimensional code, the player would become a dimensional mage. As the name suggested, it was a mage that traveled between various dimensional worlds. He could use this codex to teleport to various planes to complete various quests in order to obtain dimensional points. These points could be used to summon soul stones that contained the power of a powerful soul from another plane. He could also use them to strengthen the attributes of these soul stones. At this moment, what Fang Zheng was equipped with was the soul stone that he obtained in his first beginner's summon, Lich King Arthas. As the game's designer, Fang Zheng certainly knew how to use the soul stone. There were 2 ways to use the soul stone. One was to simply embed it in the dimensional code. This way, Fang Zheng could obtain a permanent buff. This buff could only provide a certain degree of enhancement to Fang Zheng. Unless Fang Zheng used dimensional points to enhance the soul stone, it would be like leveling up in a game, where he could gradually obtain new abilities and skills to use. The other way was to fully activate the power of the soul stone. During the activation period, Fang Zheng could use all the abilities of this existence, and it was almost the same as the original version. Just like what he used in the battle with the knights before, it was the true power of the Lich King. In front of the King of Disaster, even the regular knights of the Kingdom of Saint were so weak and vulnerable. Unfortunately, although the activation mode looked cool, there were many limitations. First of all, there would be a temporary cooldown after activation, just like a skill cooldown. Second, there was a limit to the number of times the activation could be used. For example, the Soul Stone Arthas summoned by Fang Zheng could only be activated 5 times in total. Once the number of activations was used up, the Soul Stone Arthas would completely collapse and disappear. In that case, Fang Zheng could only choose to either resummon another Soul Stone or wait for death. Executor Fang Zheng. Dimension points 0. Equipped Soul Stone Arthas. Gained buff Immortal King. 50% increase in sensitivity to undead creatures. 50% increase in damage to undead creatures, 50% increase in defense against undead creatures. Strength, E. You are no different from ordinary people. Agility, D. It's always good to run faster than others. Physique, E. You will die if you are killed. Intuition, D. Being observant and alert are basic skills for you. Charm, D. Anyone who is not blind can see your physical beauty. Equipped skills, none. Exclusive mission, Frostmourn's Curse. This demonic sword longs to devour souls full of pain, and all you need to do is to satisfy its desire. Frostmourn, Hungry, requires the holder to obtain no less than 1,000 soul power in the next mission world. Mission success will result in a random reward of +1. Failure will result in the Curse of Frostmourn. Countdown, 24 hours. Damn it! Looking at the mission notification, Fang Zheng could not help but grit his teeth. He already knew that the soul power mentioned was probably referring to the human soul. To complete this mission, Fang Zheng would have to kill 1,000 people. It's not like he had to kill 1,000 pigs. Even if 1,000 pigs lined up for him to chop, he probably wouldn't be able to kill them all in a day. But giving up on this mission. Haha! It wasn't like Fang Zheng had never played World of Warcraft before. How could he not know how terrifying this sword was? It would be a miracle if he could withstand the Curse of Frostmourn. But what made Fang Zheng depressed was that he did not know how he got this item. Fang Zheng remembered very clearly that he had only completed the main framework and settings of the system. As for the soul stones and other mission planes, Fang Zheng had not completed them at all. The programming team had not started either. But why could he summon a soul stone through this half-finished product? And it was a Lich King's soul stone at that? And this plain teleportation. Sigh! Looking at the panel in front of him, Fang Zheng let out a long sigh. If he could, he really did not want to complete this mission. After all, no one knew which world the system would take him to. But if he did not go, Fang Zheng knew very well that with his current strength, as long as the people of the Kingdom of Saints came, he could only wait to be captured. It was not that Fang Zheng had never thought of hiding in the mission world and not coming out. Unfortunately, he knew very well that he had set a time limit for each mission world he stayed in. Not only that, but like the Soul Stone, every time Fang Zheng came out of the mission world, the teleportation function would go into a cooldown state and would only be activated after a period of time. Therefore, Fang Zheng could not hide in the mission world all the time, nor could he avoid the pursuit of the Kingdom of Saints and the Church of Day of Destruction by continuously carrying out missions. Other than increasing his strength, he had no other way. Besides, Fang Zheng had a hunch that if he did not go to the dungeon now, he might not be able to leave again. And his hunch had always been very accurate. Teleport. Thinking of this, Fang Zheng no longer hesitated. He closed the dimensional codex in his hand and whispered to himself. Soon, the thick dimensional codex in his hand suddenly turned into a circle of light that surrounded and enveloped Fang Zheng. The next moment, Fang Zheng's figure disappeared in an instant. Then, the scattered light circles quickly collapsed and turned into light dust that disappeared without a trace. Swish, swish. Not long after Fang Zheng disappeared, there was a dense flapping of wings, followed by several winged, pure white Pegasi descending from the sky and landing at the place where Fang Zheng was hiding. My sister, what did you find? Riding on the Pegasi, a man who was dressed similar to the Silver Knight that Fang Zheng saw before stared at the ground carefully and asked in a low voice. Hearing his question, the female knight riding on the other Pegasi closed her eyes and sensed for a moment, then shook her head. I didn't sense any aura, my friend. I think the other party has left this place. Cursed cultists. Hearing the female knight's answer, the man clenched his fists hard. Not only did they kill our companions, but they even desecrated their corpses and souls. This behavior is absolutely unforgivable. In the name of the goddess of order, we will never let our comrades die in vain. Justice will be served. Having said that, the man waved his hand hard. For Fang Zheng, the feeling of teleportation was not pleasant at all. The moment he disappeared, Fang Zheng felt that his feet had turned into nothingness. Then, his whole body fell down quickly as if he was sitting on an endless slide. He couldn't even tell whether he was falling or not. He only felt as if there were countless stars twinkling around him, and the world was spinning around him. Then, Fang Zheng felt his body flying high. The next moment, gravity mercilessly captured his body again. Bang! Fang Zheng fell heavily to the ground again. He couldn't help but cry out. He felt as if his body was falling apart. There was not a single part of his body that was intact. Why am I so unlucky? Did I transmigrate twice in a row and get thrown to the ground twice in a row? Is there no justice in this world anymore? Fang Zheng. While Fang Zheng was cursing in his heart, a man's voice rang in his ear. Then, Fang Zheng felt someone pulling him up from the ground. He opened his eyes and looked in front of him. He saw a man in armor staring at him. Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm fine. Although he didn't know who the man in front of him was, Fang Zheng shook his head and forced himself to wake up before answering. Hearing his answer, the man finally breathed a sigh of relief. He let go of Fang Zheng and raised the sword in his hand. Quick! Let's get out of here. The damn undead are about to surround us. If we don't leave now, we won't be able to leave anymore. Ha! Upon hearing the man's words, Fang Zheng looked to the side. Only then did he realize that in the pouring rain, there were dozens of monsters whose bodies were festering. They looked like the living dead in movies walking towards them. Not far from them, there were already a few soldiers lying in pools of blood, no longer breathing. What the hell? Why are they here again? Looking at this scene, Fang Zheng was completely speechless. System, are you trying to kill me? I was being hunted down as soon as I was reborn. In order to avoid being hunted down, I switched worlds and was still surrounded? Fortunately, the ones besieging him this time were not those terrifying paladins, but a bunch of living dead. Well, that's not much better. Thinking of this, Fang Zheng drew Frostmourne with a swoosh and immediately followed the man in front of him to the end of the wilderness. The undead weren't fast, but there were a lot of them. If it weren't for Fang Zheng and the man running fast, they might not have been able to get out after being surrounded. Damn it! Only when he was out of the encirclement did the man clench his fist and swing it in the air. I didn't expect so many undead creatures to appear near the church. It's a pity about those good lads. Sigh, I can't even bury them. Having said that, the man sighed and glanced at Fang Zheng. Alright, let's go back to Tristram. These damn undead will definitely attack that place. We must protect it. Got it. Hearing the man's order, Fang Zheng didn't say anything and just nodded. It seemed that his identity in the system's mission world had already been arranged by the system. But so far, he still hadn't figured out which world he was in. Judging from the man's attire, it seemed to be similar to the main world he was reborn in. The rain got heavier and heavier. Fang Zheng and the man returned to the small town called Tristram in a sorry state. The town didn't look very big. The gate of the town was closed, and only 2 militiamen with longbows stood on the sentry tower on both sides. When the guards on the sentry tower saw the 2 approaching the gate, they immediately knocked their arrows and aimed at Fang Zheng and the others. Who are you? What are you doing here? Faced with the guard's question, the man beside Fang Zheng shouted loudly. It's me, Rumford, and Fang Zheng. We're back. It's Captain Rumford. The guards on the sentry tower were stunned for a moment when they heard Rumford's voice. Then, they immediately waved their hands and shouted, Open the gate. Captain Rumford and the others are back. Following the shouts of the guards, the gate slowly opened, and Rumford walked in with Fang Zheng. As soon as they entered the town, Fang Zheng could feel the tense atmosphere. Under the heavy rain, the whole town looked gloomy and desolate. In front of a large pit not far away, there were several corpses of militiamen lying in disorder. Rumford frowned when he saw the corpses. Why don't you cremate them? The rain is too heavy, Captain. Upon hearing Rumford's question, one of the guards wiped the rainwater off his face and answered loudly. We can't set them ablaze. Then put up a piece of cloth to block the rain. Use kerosene. Do you want to see them get up and drag you into the abyss of death too? Go. Yes, Captain. The militiaman hurriedly turned around and left after hearing Rumford's order. At that moment, Rumford heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Fang Zheng. All right, Fang Zheng, you're lucky to come back alive. Go to the Cow Butcher Hotel and have a rest. Change your clothes and have something to eat. Tell the boss to put it on my tab. Yes, Captain Rumford. Upon hearing Rumford's words, Fang Zheng nodded and turned to leave. He also needed some time to think about what kind of world he had come to. Rumford's words were so informative that Fang Zheng felt dizzy. He vaguely felt that Tristram was a little familiar, as if he had heard of him somewhere before. Fang Zheng originally planned to ask someone where the Cow Butcher Hotel was, but he soon found that he didn't have to do that. There was only one hotel in this town, and the sign was still hanging on the door. *ding. The first thing Fang Zheng smelled when he pushed open the door of the hotel and walked into the lobby was a pungent smell of medicine. Then he saw several heavily injured soldiers lying on the wall of the lobby, moaning in pain. When the boss behind the counter saw Fang Zheng, he waved at him. Yo, Fang Zheng, you're lucky to come back alive. Not bad, I'm lucky, boss. Fang Zheng smiled in response to the boss's greeting. As for the boss, he chuckled and nodded. Yeah, 16 of you went there, but only you and Captain Rumford came back alive. You're really lucky. All right, enough nonsense. I've prepared a change of clothes for you in your room. There's also some hot meat soup and pancakes waiting for you. Fang Zheng was famished. He had not had a bite of food since he was reincarnated. So when he heard the boss words, he hurriedly changed his clothes and came out to enjoy his dinner. In all fairness, the food was not particularly delicious, but when a person was hungry, anything would taste good. Fang Zheng was no exception. Since someone was treating him, he did not hesitate to eat to his heart's content. At the same time, he did not forget to flatter the boss's cooking. As a person who lived in a medieval era, the boss of the hotel had of course never heard of flattery from someone like Fang Zheng who had experienced the information explosion. With just a few words, the boss beamed with joy. Not only did he give Fang Zheng an extra meal, he even waived the bill for Fang Zheng's meal. At the same time, Fang Zheng finally succeeded in inquiring about what happened from the boss. You mean, a meteorite? Yeah. The boss nodded solemnly when he heard Fang Zheng's question. A meteorite fell from the sky and directly hit the church, causing the entire church to collapse. Oh my, you didn't see the scene. It was too scary. Then Leah came and said she wanted to gather the militia to look for her uncle. Sigh. I didn't expect something like this to happen. A meteorite? Fang Zheng could not help but frown. He seemed to have thought of something and looked at the boss. By the way, Miss Leah's uncle. What's his name? I think he's called Deca Kane. Upon hearing this, Fang Zheng finally knew what world he had come to. It was a world of darkness and despair. Everyone was struggling to survive, but they could only helplessly accept their fate. Fang Zheng was, of course, very familiar with this series. Magnificent magic, evil scenes and settings, plus the endless farming. This was the impression most players had of this world. But any player who had studied this world in depth would know that this world only looked cool on the surface. In fact, just like its name, this was a dark world full of death and destruction. A world that could never rise again. The struggle of humans would only bring them temporary peace. However, this peace would not be long before it was mercilessly broken. Just like how the sun would eventually rise and the snow would eventually melt. More importantly, this was a world that was very unfriendly to the protagonists. Although the protagonists in the game were unstoppable, in fact, almost none of the protagonists in Diablo had a good ending throughout the 3 generations. Among the 3 protagonists in the first Diablo movie, the warrior inserted Big Pineapple's soul stone into his head and tried to suppress Big Pineapple's evil soul with his strong will. Sure enough, he was corrupted by Big Pineapple and became a tool for Big Pineapple's resurrection. The other 2 were not much better off. They were either turned into evil spirits after their deaths, or succumbed to the evil will and corrupted. In the end, they became bosses and were killed by the protagonists of the second movie. Of course, the protagonists who succeeded them did not have a good ending either. Killing the Demon King and going home to marry the princess was just a pipe dream. These people either disappeared or were killed by others. In other worlds, the protagonist's aura was life-saving, but in this world, it was fatal. Because of this, after figuring out this world, Fang Zheng's first reaction was to breathe a sigh of relief. Thank God I'm not the protagonist. If he remembered correctly, he should have transmigrated to the third Diablo movie. This was the opening scene. A meteor fell from the sky and smashed Tristram Cathedral. Deckard Cain's granddaughter, Leah, gathered the militia to try to find her grandfather. At that moment, the protagonist, Nephilim, made his grand entrance and set foot on a path of no return. Well, a path of no return. Although Fang Zheng could not remember the plot of this movie very clearly, he believed that this unlucky Nephilim would not have a good ending. So what if he defeated Big Pineapple? In any case, this world was full of malice towards the protagonist. They would either be killed by an assassin sent by an old friend, die from an unlucky injury due to losing control of their magic, or be corrupted by evil forces and become a boss that would gift equipment to the next protagonist. Such an unlucky main character aura, whoever wanted it could have it. In any case, Fang Zheng politely declined. Dong, dong, dong. Just as Fang Zheng finished the meat soup, he heard hurried footsteps. Following that, he saw a militia run into the hotel. Fang Zheng, Commander Rumford wants you to go to the gate immediately. Those damned undead had appeared again. We must stop them. Got it. Upon hearing the militia's words, Fang Zheng didn't say anything. He hurriedly stood up and followed the militia out of the hotel. At this time, the rain had stopped, and a few people could be seen around. But most of them looked nervous and anxious. But Fang Zheng wasn't in the mood to care about these people. When he came to the gate, he saw that Captain Rumford had changed into a new set of clothes and was now instructing the other militias to build a roadblock. Rumford immediately waved his hand when he saw Fang Zheng. Quick, Fang Zheng, come and help us. We just repelled a wave of undead. They deserve to die. Before Rumford could finish speaking, Fang Zheng saw the roadblock on the right break with a bang. Then, several undead slowly walked in. Their eyes glowed as they staggered towards the gate. Seeing this scene, the other militias immediately tensed up. They gripped their weapons tightly in their hands and looked at the monsters in front of them without daring to breathe loudly. At the same time, a system notification sound rang in Fang Zheng's ears. A line of information appeared in front of Fang Zheng's eyes. Scenario mission triggered. Guardian. The power of darkness and evil has descended. The flames of civilization are like a candle in the wind. The test of the end of the world is coming. All you can do is accept the challenge and face the pitch-black future. Resist the attack of the undead creatures and protect the safety of the town. Mission success. +1 skill learned. +1 dimension point. Finally, a mission. Seeing the mission in front of him, Fang Zheng took the opportunity to draw his Frostmourne. But he was still a little puzzled when he saw the others acting as if they were facing a great enemy. Fang Zheng's understanding of this world was limited to the game, the plot, and the setting. As for the strength of the monsters in this game, he didn't know much about them. But in Fang Zheng's opinion, there was really nothing to be wary of about these undead. They were very slow, and unlike the zombies in worlds like Resident Evil, they could still mutate and evolve. If they were elite leaders with auras, they might be a bit of a threat. But these undead that swayed as they walked, was it really necessary for a battle-hardened warrior like Rumford to be so nervous? Despite his doubts, Fang Zheng focused his attention and stared at the undead in front of him vigilantly. He was well aware that he had just arrived in this world, and his understanding of this world was definitely not as good as Rumford's. Since the other party was so nervous, he certainly wouldn't let his guard down. After all, it was better to be careful. Although the zombies were very slow, their goal was quite clear. They were heading straight for the door. At this moment, even Fang Zheng was clenching his sword tightly. He swallowed his saliva and felt his heart begin to pound. This could be said to be his first serious battle since coming to this world. He didn't know how far he could go. Although Fang Zheng could activate the Lich King's Soul Stone 4 more times, he wouldn't use it now. The undead were low-level monsters in the dark world. How could he defeat the Lich King? Wouldn't that be like using an anti-aircraft cannon to kill a mosquito? Go! As soon as the undead stepped into the attack range, Rumford roared, raised his sword, and slashed at them. Fang Zheng gritted his teeth, clenched the hilt of Frostmourne, and slashed at the undead in front of him. Boom! What the heck? When the sword slashed down, Fang Zheng was dumbfounded. He finally understood why a bunch of zombies who walked slower than grannies could make an old warrior like Rumford feel like he was facing a formidable enemy. There was only one word to describe it. Tough. This guy is so tough. Although Frostmourne in Fang Zheng's hand couldn't use most of its special abilities because he hadn't activated the Soul Stone, it was still a top-grade sword. Previously, when Fang Zheng dealt with the Silver Knights, Frostmourne cut through their armor as easily as cutting through butter. But when Fang Zheng slashed at the undead, it felt like he was slashing at a tire. He only felt that Frostmourne only cut into the muscles and then got stuck. How can there be such a tough undead? But what surprised Fang Zheng wasn't just this. Roar! Although the undead moved slowly, it wasn't a target. It growled, spread its arms, and grabbed at Fang Zheng. Fang Zheng hurriedly withdrew his sword and used it to block in front of him. But what Fang Zheng didn't expect was that when the undead's claws hit Frostmourne, he felt a powerful force coming at him. And then Fang Zheng was sent flying. Ugh! Fang Zheng slammed his head into the door behind him, feeling as though his body was about to fall apart. He now finally understood why this group of living dead, who seemed to be staggering and could not move much faster than a turtle, could wipe out a whole militia. Apart from being slow, these bastards had no weakness at all. When Fang Zheng saw Nephilim in the game, he thought that these undead were pushovers. But now, they might not be as strange as the mutated zombies in Resident Evil, but their hardness and strength alone were at the tyrant level. Fang Zheng, stand up. Don't let them surround you. Hearing Captain Rumford's shout, Fang Zheng gritted his teeth, rolled to his feet, and raised Frostmourne to face the undead again. But this time, Fang Zheng was smarter. He didn't clash head-on with the undead because Fang Zheng had discovered that the undead in the Diablo world were strong and had high defense, but their speed was their weakness. Therefore, he didn't attack immediately this time. Instead, he let the undead attack him first. Then, while the undead raised its hands, Fang Zheng immediately raised his sword and chopped off the undead's hands. This time, Frostmourne finally displayed the power of its artifact. Although the undead's arms were also very hard, they were still completely chopped off by Fang Zheng's all-out attack. The undead without hands was like a tiger without teeth. It shook its head and intended to attack Fang Zheng again. But this time, Fang Zheng also learned to be smarter and directly chopped off its head. The undead swayed a few times, then fell to the ground, dead. Finally, there's a way. Seeing the undead fall, Fang Zheng heaved a sigh of relief. Then he hurriedly picked up his weapon and ran toward the other undead. At this time, Captain Rumford and the other militias were entangled with the undead. Fang Zheng only glanced at them and understood why they couldn't beat the undead. Weapons were no good. Fang Zheng had Frostmourne in his hand, but it was already difficult for him to chop these undead. Not to mention, these militias were only holding the most ordinary weapons. Naturally, they couldn't do much. Fang Zheng had seen Captain Rumford slash at the zombies with his sword with his own eyes. He had only managed to leave a few wounds after 4 or 5 slashes. It was as though he had used a knife to carve out a stone slab. Captain Rumford! Upon hearing Fang Zheng's shout, Rumford glanced at Fang Zheng. After seeing the undead at Fang Zheng's feet, his eyes lit up, and he immediately nodded to Fang Zheng. At the same time, he took half a step forward and brandished his sword to restrain the undead in front of him. While Rumford distracted the undead, Fang Zheng took advantage of the undead's distraction to sneak behind it. He swung his sword and cut off the undead's head. The militias were also experienced. Seeing that Fang Zheng's weapon could deal with the undead, they naturally played the role of MT without hesitation. With the cooperation of both sides, it didn't take long for the undead to be wiped out. Phew! It wasn't until the last undead fell to the ground that Fang Zheng wiped the sweat off his forehead. At the same time, he could see white mist-like gas emerging from the undead's bodies. They entangled and turned into shapes similar to human faces, which were then sucked into Frostmourne as if they were attracted by a magnet. At the same time, lines of system prompts appeared in front of Fang Zheng. Soul power plus 10. Soul power plus 13. Soul power plus 12. Done. Seeing the system prompts in front of him, Fang Zheng finally breathed a sigh of relief. He had been worried about how to complete the Frostmourne mission, but now it seemed that completing the mission was no longer difficult. Ding! While Fang Zheng was absorbing the soul power, the system prompt rang in his ears again. Then, another line of words appeared in front of Fang Zheng. Scenario Mission Guardian Progress 1 completed. User received skill reward. User received Dimension Point plus 1. Please choose a skill. Frost Strike, Crusader Strike. Choose? Upon seeing the notification, Fang Zheng could not help but be taken aback. Weren't these two skills the skills of the Death Knight and Paladin in the Mountain Pass? Fang Zheng could understand the Death Knight, but what the hell was a Paladin? Thinking of this, Fang Zheng couldn't help but pat his head, lamenting his stupidity. The soul stone he had now was Arthas. Wasn't Arthas a Paladin before becoming a Lich King? Choose Crusader Strike. Although Fang Zheng really wanted to choose Frost Strike, he still chose Crusader Strike after much consideration. The reason was simple. He could imagine that the people in the overworld would have already discovered the corpses of the knights that he had killed. Although Fang Zheng wasn't sure how many clues they could find from the corpses, he could imagine that they would definitely have some information. If he learned Frost Strike, it would easily attract the attention of those knights. After all, the Death Knights and the Lich King were from the same faction. As long as one wasn't an idiot, they could immediately guess the connection between the two after watching Fang Zheng's battles. Instead of taking the initiative to give the paladins of the overworld something that could be used against him, it was better to do the opposite. At least a person who used holy power wouldn't be associated with the Lich King, the Undying King. Ding! As soon as Fang Zheng's voice fell, he heard a light sound in his ear. After that, he suddenly felt dizzy. Then, he felt that his brain had suddenly appeared with some information that he had never seen before. After that, a line of system prompt appeared in front of Fang Zheng's eyes. Learned Crusader Strike. Skills. Crusader Strike. Proficiency. D. Beginner. Upgradable. Upgrade. Seeing this, Fang Zheng was stunned for a moment. He opened up the interface and saw that under the skill, Crusader Strike, there was a gray progress bar that was divided into 5 equal parts. Fang Zheng extended his hand to tap on it, and soon, another prompt appeared in front of him. Do you want to use dimension points to upgrade your proficiency? No. Looking at the prompt in front of him, Fang Zheng decisively chose to reject the upgrade. As the designer of this system, of course, Fang Zheng knew what it was. Dimension points were very precious. According to Fang Zheng's previous design, 10 dimension points could summon a soul stone. Now, the dimensional codex in Fang Zheng's hands was basically a mobile game system that couldn't be used with credit cards. And common sense also told him that since he couldn't use credit cards, he naturally had to save up those stones that could be used to draw cards. This was the self-cultivation of an unlucky person. After doing all this, Fang Zheng turned off the system and looked around again. Although he looked like he had been thinking for a long time, in fact, less than half a minute had passed. At this time, the militia also began to deal with the living dead around them, preparing for another battle. The previous victory had boosted their morale a little, but their faces were still gloomy. But to Fang Zheng this was normal. There were undead everywhere, and Tristram didn't have enough manpower. They might be able to hide for a while with the town's defenses, but if the undead banded together, Tristram would fall. What they were doing now was just a final struggle before death. Dong, dong, dong. Suddenly, a series of heavy footsteps sounded. The militias stopped what they were doing and looked towards the direction of the footsteps. Soon, a figure appeared in front of them. She was wearing heavy white armor and holding a long sword and shield in her hands. Seeing this classic outfit, Fang Zheng didn't even need to guess to know her true identity. The Crusader. Nephilim had made her grand entrance. Under Fang Zheng's gaze, the Crusader walked up to Captain Rumford, put down the shield in her hand, and nodded at Rumford. I'm a crusader who believes in Sakaram. I saw a meteor fall into this town. Crusader. Rumford seemed relieved when he heard the name. He shrugged and said, "It fell on the roof of the old church. It hit the roof of the old church. There was only one survivor at that time, Leah. You should talk to her." But before Captain Rumford could finish his sentence, one of the militiamen suddenly screamed, "Captain, they're coming again." "What?" Rumford was shocked when he heard the militia's words. Fang Zheng hurriedly turned his head and looked to the side. Under their watchful eyes, the ground gradually began to bulge. Then, one by one, grayish-white living dead crawled out of it and staggered towards them. "Damn it!" Looking at this scene, Captain Rumford frowned and dashed forward like an arrow. "Let's deal with these living dead first before I open the door for you. Everyone else, let's go." Upon hearing Rumford's order, Fang Zheng clenched Frostmourne again. But this time he looked at the living dead eagerly. "I've learned Crusader Strike. Can't I deal with these zombies?" Thinking of this, Fang Zheng also faced one of the zombies. Then he raised Frostmourne high in his hand and swung it down hard. Crusader Strike. With the activation of the skill, Fang Zheng could see a brilliant golden light appear on Frostmourne's blade. Then the long sword in his hand slashed at the undead. The moment Frostmourne struck the living dead, Fang Zheng clearly felt a holy power attached to Frostmourne. It erupted instantly. Boom! Fang Zheng felt like he wasn't holding a long sword, but a huge hammer instead. The living dead that was slashed by Fang Zheng exploded from the holy power. Fang Zheng even saw cracks appearing on its sturdy body. Then, a golden light shot out from the cracks. Shortly after, a holy cross suddenly appeared on the living dead's body. The living dead let out a wail and flew backward. Then, it exploded and turned into fragments on the ground. The entire process took less than 5 seconds, but Fang Zheng was dumbfounded by what he saw. Is this Crusader Strike? Such cool special effects and brilliant flashes, and you're telling me this is a normal skill? Is this the effect of a skill with top-notch image quality? Or is Earthies practicing the Royal Limited Edition Crusader Strike? This doesn't seem right. Fang Zheng killed a living dead with Crusader Strike, but he also successfully attracted the aggro of the other living dead. Soon, he saw several living dead abandoning their original target and staggering towards him. He had to admit that although these living dead did not seem to be a big threat, they were troublesome when there were so many of them. But Fang Zheng was no longer the Fang Zheng of the past. While mastering the skill, Crusader Strike, a series of combat techniques and knowledge emerged in his mind. He did not choose to retreat. Instead, he seized an opening before the encirclement of the living dead formed. He raised Frostmourne in his hand and rushed toward one of the targets. A dazzling holy radiance appeared on Frostmourne again. This time, Fang Zheng could even feel Frostmourne's dissatisfaction and depression through the hilt of the sword. It was no wonder that Frostmourne was using it to deal with undead creatures. Not only that, but you're also using holy light? Frostmourne now revealed a strong sense of helplessness, as if a beautiful woman was a thief. But Fang Zheng was obviously not in the mood to coax a sword. He stared at the living dead in front of him and slashed again, sending them flying. Then, Fang Zheng rolled on the ground and dodged the attacks of 2 living dead behind him. Then, he clenched his long sword and swung it behind him. A beam of golden light swept across and immediately sent the 2 living dead who were already close to it flying. The gap between Nephilim and an ordinary person was immediately apparent. The living dead that Rumford needed several strikes to injure didn't even survive a single round of attacks from the Sacred Army Girl's meteor hammer. Fang Zheng watched as the Sacred Army Girl swung her meteor hammer forward, and the living dead were smashed away like fallen leaves in the autumn wind. It couldn't have been any easier. If this were in the past, Fang Zheng would only curl his lips and not take it to heart when he saw the same scene as in the game. But after experiencing for himself how difficult it was to deal with the living dead, Fang Zheng finally had a direct understanding of Nephilim's existence. Even when Fang Zheng defeated the living dead, he relied entirely on the power of the holy light of the Crusaders. However, Nephilim was completely relying on his own strength. With a single swing of his hammer, Those unlucky living dead would die without a trace, while the lucky ones would be able to let go of their freedom. Fang Zheng clicked his tongue in wonder. He finally had a direct understanding of Nephilim's power. Wait a minute, what am I doing here? I still have a mission to complete. When the sacred army girl in front of him swept away the living dead again, Fang Zheng was taken aback. Only then did he remember that he wasn't here to watch a show. Frostmourne was still hungry. With that thought in mind, Fang Zheng did not hesitate. He gripped his weapon tightly and charged forward. Compared to the teaching stage in the game, Fang Zheng and the others encountered more living dead. In addition to the first wave of living dead that crawled out of the ground, several more waves of living dead attacked them one after another. There were more and more of them, to the point where Fang Zheng and the Crusader couldn't hold them off even after working together. The civilian soldiers suffered heavy casualties. Apart from Captain Rumford, who was still trying his best to hold on, the other civilian soldiers were either dead or injured. It seemed like they wouldn't be able to live much longer. This wasn't right. After killing another undead, Fang Zheng heaved a sigh of relief. He raised his head and looked around. Apart from the flames at the entrance of Tristram, everything else was shrouded in darkness. He could only hear the low roars of the living dead and the occasional flashes of light. Ha! Damn it! Isn't this a little too much? Holding Frostmourne in his hand and staring at the undead walking out of the darkness, Fang Zheng could not help but gasp for breath. He couldn't even remember how many living dead he had killed. He only remembered that when he cut down one, another two would pop up next to him. After cutting down two, more appeared. There seemed to be an endless stream of them, as if there was no end to them. Is this the real world of darkness? It was only at this moment that Fang Zheng felt a trace of fear. When he was playing the game, the only feeling he had was that he was going to die of annoyance. The most he could think of was why the humans in the dark world were so miserable. But now, Fang Zheng finally understood that the game was different from reality. There was a reason why humans in the world of darkness were forced to the point of extinction. Ha! Looking at the undead pouncing at him, Fang Zheng clenched Frostmourne and slashed forward with a roar. With a flash of holy light, the undead was split into two at the waist and fell to the ground. But to Fang Zheng's surprise, the moment the undead fell to the ground, its upper body suddenly jumped, and its two hands quickly crawled on the ground to grab him. F***CK. Upon seeing this sudden scene, Fang Zheng was also given a fright. Almost instinctively, he raised Frostmourne and stabbed down. The sharp blade pierced through the undead's body with a whoosh. Then wisps of soul mist emerged from the undead's body and were absorbed into Frostmourne. Then, the undead's trembling body stopped moving as if it had lost its energy supply. 235. Glancing at the soul power value in the system prompt, Fang Zheng took a deep breath. Although this kind of grinding was not what he wanted, it seemed that Frostmourne's soul-absorbing mission was now possible. The dark world might be lacking in other things, but it was not lacking monsters. And Fang Zheng believed that Frostmourne must like these evil souls very much. Ugh! At the same time, a strange sound suddenly came from the dense forest in the distance. It sounded like the cry of a woman, or the sound of a drunkard vomiting. Upon hearing this voice, Rumford and the Sacred Legion young lady's expression changed instantly. Zombie mother. I was wondering why these damn things can't be killed no matter how hard I try. At that moment, Fang Zheng came to a realization. The corpse mother was a monster transformed from the queen's maidservant. The greatest characteristic of such a monster was that she could create more living dead. Fang Zheng didn't know the principle behind this, but he knew that the process of the zombie mother creating the undead was to vomit. Then the undead would crawl out of the puddle. Ugh! Just thinking about it made his stomach churn. We must kill the zombie mother. I know! Hearing Captain Rumford's voice, Fang Zheng responded without turning his head. Then he gripped Frostmourne tightly and rushed into the dense forest. The reason why Fang Zheng worked so hard was not just to get rid of the threat, but because the moment Rumford spoke, Fang Zheng also received a system prompt. Scenario mission triggered. Guardian 2. You have detected the source of evil and found its traces. What you need to do next is to use the sharp blade in your hand to end everything. Eliminate the zombie mother. Dimension point +1. But even though Fang Zheng was fast, the Crusader wasn't slow either. The moment Fang Zheng stepped into the dense forest, he saw the Crusader flash with a golden light. Then, Fang Zheng watched in surprise as the Crusader charged into the depths of the forest like a cannonball. Boom! The shining Crusader streaked across the darkness like a meteor. Everything along the way was crushed by the powerful impact. Then Fang Zheng saw a figure appear in front of the Crusader. The Crusader raised his shield without hesitation and smashed it into the Crusader's face. Thud! The unlucky zombie mother was sent flying. But the Crusader didn't follow up with another attack. Because at this moment, several undead swayed in front of her and blocked the Crusader's path. Good chance. Seeing that the Crusader was stopped, Fang Zheng heaved a sigh of relief. If the Crusader Star Hammer crushed the zombie mother's head, then he would naturally fail this scenario mission. But now that the Crusader was stopped, even though it was only for a short period of time, it was more than enough for Fang Zheng. Well done. While secretly praising the corpse mother in his heart, Fang Zheng held Frostmourne and ran deeper into the forest along the path that the Sacred Army had opened up. Shortly after, he saw the unlucky zombie mother. At this moment, she was crawling on the ground and it seemed like she couldn't even stand up. Good chance. Looking at this scene, Fang Zheng's eyes lit up. He glanced to the side. At this moment, the Crusader was entangled by the undead and couldn't free himself for the time being. As long as he could make it in time, Fang Zheng would be sure to take this zombie mother's head. At this thought, Fang Zheng dashed over without hesitation. He didn't have the powerful charge skill of the Crusader, but fortunately, the zombie mother was sent flying into an empty space in the forest. Therefore, Fang Zheng didn't spend too much time dashing out of the bushes. Then, he raised Frostmourne and swung it at the zombie mother. Crusader strike. And at the instant Fang Zheng swung his sword down, he saw the zombie mother, who was sprawled on the ground, suddenly raise her head. She looked at Fang Zheng and opened her mouth. Following that, with an ugh sound, Fang Zheng saw a huge pile of filth mixed with a foul stench assaulting him. What the heck? Looking at this scene, Fang Zheng was taken aback. He cancelled the skill without hesitation and rolled to the side. Along with a soft thud, the pile of filth hit the ground not far from Fang Zheng. With the help of the weak light, Fang Zheng could even see the dark green, constantly expanding air bubbles. Even the surrounding ground began to emit white smoke and sink down slowly. It was imaginable that if one was hit by this thing, one would definitely suffer. Trying to trick me? At this moment, Fang Zheng was also bursting with anger. You're a zombie mother that was beaten half to death by the Sacred Army, and you still dare to plot against me? Do you think I'm easy to bully? He picked up Frostmourne and gazed at the zombie mother before him. The zombie mother glared at him fiercely. Upon seeing Fang Zheng's gaze, she opened her mouth and was about to scream. But this time, before she screamed, Fang Zheng stabbed his sword into her mouth. Crusader strike. Holy light instantly erupted. In Fang Zheng's eyes, he saw the zombie mother's skull start to crack. Cracks appeared on the zombie mother's skin, following which, a dazzling holy radiance shot out from the cracks, becoming increasingly bright. Along with a loud bang, the zombie mother's body exploded and turned into ashes in the white, holy flames. At the same time, Fang Zheng heard the system prompt again. Then, lines of information appeared before Fang Zheng's eyes. Scenario Mission Guardian Progress 2 completed. User received Dimension Point +1. Received 70 Spiritual Powers. Crusader Strike Skill Proficiency increased to C rank. Crusader Strike upgraded to AoE skill. As expected. Seeing this line of information, Fang Zheng rolled his eyes. Then, he opened his skill panel again. As expected, 1/5 of the progress bar under the skill Crusader Strike had turned orange-red. At that moment, Fang Zheng was rendered speechless. He had previously done it in the system. As one's proficiency increased, the skill itself would gradually become stronger. This was naturally to attract noobs and bosses to spend money. After all, dimension points were either saved or spent money. Although the proficiency of a skill increased, the power of the skill would also increase. But for ordinary people, dimension points were definitely not enough. For the bosses who spent money, the only problem left was to buy and buy. This was the usual shamelessness of mobile games. But Fang Zheng did not expect to become a victim. Was it really true that he would run into a ghost when he walked too far? Fortunately, the mission this time was relatively simple. He only had to kill a zombie mother, and he received a dimension point. If the missions in the future were this simple, then it would be even more. Ding! But before Fang Zheng could finish sighing, he heard the system prompt again. Then, another line of information appeared in front of Fang Zheng. Scenario mission triggered. Guardian 3. Looking at the corpse in front of you, you deeply feel that the darkness in front of you is not as easy as you think. You feel the irreversible wheel of fate rolling towards you. All you can do is do your best to change everything. Change the established fate. Complete the mission and you will receive a random reward. Dimension points +3. Failing the mission will force you to lock the mission world. Countdown. 48:00. Seeing this mission prompt, Fang Zheng was completely speechless. There was only one sentence in his mind. With the death of the zombie mother, the undead army's attack on Tristram finally came to an end. When Fang Zheng dragged his exhausted body back to the town gate with the paladin, the only living people left to greet them were Rumford and the two archers. "Well done, kid." Rumford smiled happily at Fang Zheng. He patted Fang Zheng's shoulder hard, then turned to the paladin beside him. "Thank you for your help. You can go in now. Leah is in the cattle butcher hotel. Fang Zheng will take you there. What's wrong, kid?" "It's nothing, Captain Rumford." Upon hearing Rumford's concerned question, Fang Zheng shrugged gloomily and said, "It's fine." He really regretted his thoughts just now. Fang Zheng thought that although the mission issued by the system was a little troublesome and dangerous, at least it had a clear mission goal. But Fang Zheng didn't expect the third stage of the Guardian mission to be so annoying. Change your destiny. Fang Zheng was depressed when he thought of the mission requirements. The missions that the system refreshed were all random, so he had no impression of them at all. The mission notification itself didn't give any clues. It only asked Fang Zheng to change his destiny. As for the specific content of the mission, there was no explanation. Not only that, the system also specifically reminded him that if he failed the mission, he would be forced to leave the mission world. The system also, thoughtfully, included a countdown timer. Fang Zheng only had 48 hours to change his so-called destiny. Fang Zheng originally planned to grind by Nephilim's side, but now it seemed impossible. "Please come with me." With that in mind, Fang Zheng braced himself and nodded to the paladin beside him, then walked into the town. The two of them did not talk much along the way. If there was time, Fang Zheng would like to see what kind of person the official Nephilim was. However, he wasn't in the mood to waste time. The third phase of the quest only gave him 48 hours, and Fang Zheng had no clue about this destiny. Fang Zheng couldn't really remember the storyline of Diablo 3, but it was no wonder. After all, when you were addicted to the greater dungeon every day, what Diablo 3 was about was no longer important to you. Before that, it was more important to farm for new equipment. When Fang Zheng arrived at the bull butchering inn with the sacred army, he immediately saw Rhea frowning at the counter. The short-haired girl was sitting on a chair at the moment, whispering something to the boss. Upon seeing Fang Zheng pushing the door open, the boss immediately interrupted his conversation with Leah and waved at him enthusiastically. "Kid, you saved us once again. Here, this is on me. Who's this lady?" Upon hearing the boss question, the sacred army beside Fang Zheng came forward. She took off her helmet and revealed a handsome face. Her long blonde hair was tied into a ponytail and draped over her shoulder. She smiled warmly at the boss, then turned to Rhea. "Nice to meet you, Miss Rhea. I'm a sacred army believer of Zak Aram. My name is Airbus." "What the heck?" Fang Zheng, who was walking to the counter, almost spilled the wine in his hand when he heard this. He turned around and stared at the paladin in bewilderment. "Nephilim. Your hairstyle and name are both very inauspicious. I can already see the ending, can't I? Putting everything else aside, Fang Zheng felt that the most important thing to do right now was to get this sacred military lady to change her name and hairstyle. That way, his mission would probably be completed easily. As if that would happen. Could it be Ria? With that thought in mind, Fang Zheng looked at the young girl again. Of course, he knew that there was an evil god hidden in her body, and that the evil god would eventually resurrect through her body. Logically speaking, if Fang Zheng killed her with a single slash, that would change her fate. But, was that even possible? Ria herself was a combat professional, and the evil god's power in her was equally terrifying. Even if Fang Zheng ambushed her by surprise, he would not be able to deceive the evil god. If he forced the evil god into a corner, Fang Zheng would not be able to get away with it. So, this thought only flashed through Fang Zheng's mind for a moment before he immediately dismissed it. At that moment, Erebus had already started to ask Ria about the meteor that fell from the sky. Ria explained the situation to the Nephilim just like in the game, and at the same time, asked her to look for her uncle, Deckard Cain. Fang Zheng's eyes suddenly lit up. How could he have overlooked such an important person? Deckard Cain. If Fang Zheng remembered correctly, Deckard Cain was threatened by the cult leader Magda to repair the broken holy sword of the angel Tyrell. However, Cain refused to comply and was seriously injured by Magda's men. Ria then unleashed her power and drove Magda and her men away. In the end, Cain used the last bit of his strength to repair the holy sword, but he died because he was out of energy. At that time, Nephilim left Tristram to look for the third fragment of the holy sword. If Xian could find the third fragment of the holy sword earlier, would he be able to prevent Nephilim from leaving Tristram? Would he be able to change his fate this way? Fang Zheng felt that this was the key to changing his fate. With his current strength, saving Nephilim or killing Big Pineapple was out of the question. He was just a militia now. Even if he learned Crusader Strike, Fang Zheng did not think he would be more capable than Nephilim. Excluding the difficult options, the only thing he could do now was to find the third fragment of the holy sword earlier. This way, Cain could repair the holy sword earlier, and Tyrell, who had lost his memory, would not be captured by Magda. Then Cain would be able to survive the maze again and again. Wouldn't that be great? Taking a step back, even if Cain died due to some accident, Tyrell would not be captured and Tyrell would be able to recover his memory earlier. This could also be considered as changing his fate. With this in mind, Fang Zheng immediately made a decision. With the main character, Nephilim, there, he wasn't afraid of any problems. Furthermore, the mission had given him a time limit, so he was certain that the plot would happen nearby. Otherwise, if Fang Zheng went to the high heaven to change his fate, the mission time would probably be over before he could get there. In that case, I will set off immediately. At this time, the paladin with the dangerous hairstyle and name had finished talking with Ria. She stood up, put on her helmet again, and looked at Fang Zheng. Do you want to come with me? No, I have a more important mission. Although it was good to be valued by the protagonist, Fang Zheng did not have the time to waste on this. So, he shook his head and rejected Nephilim's invitation. Nephilim did not say much, only nodded slightly, and immediately turned around to leave. After watching Nephilim leave, Fang Zheng also walked out of the bar. He had wanted to chat with Ria, but unfortunately, she didn't seem to be in the mood to do so. Perhaps it was because Fang Zheng had rejected Nephilim's request that Ria was displeased. Therefore, the girl only glanced at Fang Zheng and returned to her room without saying a word. But of course, Fang Zheng would not stoop to her level. If he accidentally provoked Big Pineapple, he would be the one in trouble, wouldn't he? At this thought, Fang Zheng did not say much. He left the tavern, looked for Captain Rumford, and requested to head to Watson. Watson! Upon hearing Fang Zheng's request, Captain Rumford was clearly surprised. Why are you going to Watson? I received some news that some fragments of the meteorite fell in the direction of Watson. So, I want to go to Watson to see if I can find clues to unravel the secrets of the meteorite. There was nothing wrong with what Fang Zheng said, so Rumford did not think for long before nodding and agreeing to his request. All right, I will inform the boatman to prepare the boat. But you just went through a fierce battle. Don't you want to rest before leaving? It's fine. I will just take a break along the way. After all, the countdown to the mission had begun. So where would he find the time to waste in bed? All right. The journey from Tristram to Watson was longer than Fang Zheng had expected. When he was woken up by the boatman in his cabin and stepped onto Watson's dock, it was already 5 hours later. I wasted 5 hours just like that? Fang Zheng frowned as he watched the boatman's departing figure. He didn't expect Watson to be so far away from Tristram, and it was a one-way ticket. The boatman had told him that he was only in charge of sending and not receiving. At first, Fang Zheng was doubtful, but after some thought, he understood. Wasn't there a teleportation circle under Watson's chapel? Wouldn't that be much faster than a boat ride? Forget it, I'll just look for the fragment first. With that thought in mind, Fang Zheng walked into Watson Town. At this time, Watson Town hadn't been attacked by the cultists like in the game. The people were still living in peace. From time to time, he could see fishing boats and children playing by the fields. Looking at this scene, Fang Zheng couldn't help but feel a little melancholy. He could imagine that if the cultists attacked here, there would be nothing that could escape. Unfortunately, Fang Zheng was like a clay bodhisattva crossing a river. He could not even protect himself. He could only hope that he could take the fragment away as soon as possible. That way, the cultists would not have a reason to attack Watson, and they could divert their attention to protect the peaceful village. Fang Zheng, an outsider, didn't attract much attention in the town. Perhaps because most of the people were busy with work, the entire town seemed peaceful and serene. But Fang Zheng didn't intend to cause any trouble. He quickly found the chapel in the town and knocked on the door. Shortly after, a man dressed like a priest walked out of the chapel and looked at Fang Zheng curiously. "Greetings, stranger. May I know what brings you to Watson?" "Greetings, priest." Fang Zheng looked at the priest and nodded. Then, he took out Rumford's letter and handed it over. "I'm a militia from Tristram. A meteor fell there and I heard that some of its fragments fell in Watson. So I'm here to see if there are any clues." "Meteor?" Hearing Fang Zheng's answer, the priest was stunned for a moment, then nodded as if he suddenly understood. "I know what you're talking about. It just so happens that we found something very strange. Please come with me." As he spoke, the priest moved aside and gestured for Fang Zheng to enter. Upon hearing the pastor's words, Fang Zheng gazed at him meaningfully and entered the church. The entire church was dark. Only the light from the candles could barely be seen. "What is it?" Fang Zheng asked casually as he walked into the church. At this moment, he heard the sound of the church door closing behind him. Then the priest's voice sounded again. "Oh, our fisherman fished it out when he was fishing. It emits a very strange power from time to time. The fisherman didn't know what it was, so he sent it to the church. I wanted to keep it safe, but I didn't expect it to be related to that meteor." As the priest spoke, he stared at Fang Zheng's back. Then, he stretched out his hand and quietly took out a dagger from his pocket. Fang Zheng didn't seem to notice it at all. He just looked around curiously and asked casually, "So, where's the fragment?" "It's right in front." As he spoke, the priest secretly quickened his pace. He quietly walked behind Fang Zheng, clenched the dagger in his hand, and stabbed at Fang Zheng. At the same time, a cold light suddenly flashed. How? How?" The priest's eyes widened in surprise. He looked at the cold blade that cut into his body. The chill of Frostmourne spread in all directions, making him feel a trace of fear that even his soul was about to be frozen. "How did you find out? Your acting skills are terrible. Go home and practice again." Looking at the stunned priest in front of him, Fang Zheng sneered. In fact, when he met the priest, Fang Zheng already noticed that there was something wrong with the priest. The priest's eyes were full of worry at first, but when he heard the reason why Fang Zheng came, the priest showed a trace of anxiety. What made Fang Zheng suspicious was that the priest didn't check Rumford's letter too carefully. He only opened it and gave it a cursory glance, then immediately let Fang Zheng into the church. Fang Zheng had always been good at reading people's expressions, which helped him obtain information. Now, he was using this to judge that something was wrong. What made Fang Zheng even more certain was that after entering the church, the priest actually walked behind him instead of in front. Generally speaking, since the priest was the one who hid the fragment, he should be responsible for leading the way, but the priest used the excuse of closing the door to fall behind Xian. It would be strange if there wasn't a problem. More importantly, when the priest made his move, Fang Zheng clearly heard his breathing become heavy. This was an instinctive human reaction, which meant that he was either very excited or very nervous. Therefore, Fang Zheng summoned Frostmourne without hesitation and slashed at the priest behind him. The facts proved that Fang Zheng's judgment was correct. The priest was also a cultist. With a scream, the soul of the cultist was forcibly extracted from his body and absorbed into Frostmourne. At the same time, a line of information appeared in front of Fang Zheng. Soul power plus 45. Sure enough, the soul of a living person was stronger than that of a living dead. Looking at the system prompt, Fang Zheng curled his lips. Then, he put away Frostmourne and began to search for the holy sword fragment. Since the priest was a cultist, it was highly likely that Magda already knew about the holy sword fragment. Come to think of it, the priest might have deliberately stalled for time, which was why he led Nephilim in circles. It was highly likely that the holy sword fragment had already been taken by Magda before Nephilim arrived at Watson. The more Fang Zheng thought about it, the more he felt that this was the truth. Otherwise, why would he meet Magda's phantom when Nephilim arrived at the cellar in the game? Moreover, she was calm and composed as though she was waiting for him there? Wasn't this clearly a trap? It really isn't here. Fang Zheng quickly checked the church and didn't find anything. However, this didn't worry him. Instead, it strengthened Fang Zheng's judgment. The priest didn't place the fragment in the church before moving it to the cellar like in the game. Instead, it was hidden in the cellar all along. Perhaps the cultist thought that he was foolproof, but he obviously didn't know that Fang Zheng already knew the location of the cellar from the game. After searching the church to no avail, he immediately left through the back door of the church and went to the cellar next to it. This place was naturally locked, but Fang Zheng didn't care about such trivial matters. At the thought that the cultists and their leader might appear at any time, he raised his guard and cut open the door of the cellar with his sword. Then he walked into the cellar. The entire cellar didn't look much different from the game. When Fang Zheng walked through the corridor and arrived at the center of the cellar, he quickly saw the sword hilt that was emitting a gentle glow on the platform in the center. This is the holy sword fragment. Fortunately, it's still here. Upon seeing this fragment, Fang Zheng finally felt relieved. He walked to the edge of the platform and carefully checked his surroundings. After confirming that there were no traps, he reached out his hand to take the sword hilt and put it in his pocket. Only then did Fang Zheng feel at ease. All right, everything's done. It's easier than I thought. The next thing to do is to return to Tristram. Whoosh! However, before Fang Zheng could finish his sentence, a beam of light flashed behind the platform in front of him. Immediately following that, Fang Zheng saw several people dressed in yellow robes, dressed like cultists, walk out. They couldn't help but be taken aback when they saw Fang Zheng. As for Fang Zheng, he was also stunned for a moment when he saw the cultists suddenly appear. Then, he immediately came to his senses. This unexpected encounter caused both parties to be stunned. Fang Zheng did not expect these cultists to be teleported directly to this cellar through the teleportation circle. After all, in the game, when players went to Watson, they would see a town engulfed in flames and cultists everywhere. Therefore, they would naturally think that these cultists had invaded Watson. But now that he thought about it carefully, if the priest in Watson was indeed a cultist, it would be normal for the teleportation circle here to be connected to Magda's lair. The cultists obviously did not expect to meet Fang Zheng in this secret cellar either. Judging from his attire, he looked like a militia. But how could an ordinary militia enter this place? Could it be that he was also one of their companions? You! The leader of the cultists looked at Fang Zheng and was about to say something, but Fang Zheng had already rushed over. He gripped Frostmourne tightly with both hands and swung it forward. He who strikes first gains the upper hand, and he who strikes later suffers the consequences. There were more than a dozen cultists teleported here this time, and Xian did not know if they were the vanguard of the cultists. It was too late for Fang Zheng to escape now, so he might as well seize the initiative and catch him off guard. Crusader Strike. As Fang Zheng swung his sword, Frostmourne in his hand trembled again. A dazzling holy light suddenly burst out, illuminating the dark cellar like a flashbang. The cultists who had just teleported here and had not figured out the situation instinctively raised their hands to block in front of themselves. This time, the Crusader Strike, which had a higher proficiency level, burst out with power that Fang Zheng had never imagined. As Fang Zheng swung his sword, several holy symbols in the shape of a cross suddenly appeared around the blade. They shot out in all directions like heavy hammers, hitting the cultists heavily. Then, with a flash of light, they exploded, and the cultists were sent flying. They hit the wall behind them and collapsed to the ground. So awesome? Seeing this scene, Fang Zheng could not help but be surprised. He did not expect the Crusader Strike to be so powerful after it was upgraded to an area of effect skill. It was almost on par with the Nephilim skills in the Dark World. But when he thought about it carefully, it was not surprising that the two skills came from the same school and were made by the same company. Was it because he was in the Dark World that Crusader Strike became like this? No matter what, this was obviously a welcome change for Fang Zheng. Hence, this thought only flashed through his mind for a moment before quickly disappearing. Immediately afterward, Fang Zheng tightened his grip on the long sword in his hand and retracted it. With this action, the golden light particles remaining from the exploding cross symbols seemed to be attracted to Frostmourne. Then Fang Zheng stabbed the cultist in front of him. Ah! The sword instantly pierced the chest of the leader of the cultists. Before he could move, he screamed and fell to the ground, motionless. As for Fang Zheng, he retracted his sword and slashed to the side once again, successfully beheading 2 more people. But just as he was about to continue, a dark shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. Roar! A pitch-black, strange-looking hellhound suddenly appeared. It roared angrily as it opened its mouth and bit down at Fang Zheng. Facing the attack of the hellhound, Fang Zheng had no choice but to give up. He forced the hellhound back with his sword and looked forward again. At that moment, several other cultists also stood up and raised their hands to summon their evil servants. Soon, black holes appeared in front of them, and evil servants of various forms walked out of them and blocked in front of Fang Zheng. These cultists seemed to have some tricks up their sleeves. Fang Zheng sighed in his heart when he saw that the cultists could recover so quickly. At the same time, he silently increased the threat level of the cultists in this world. Previously, during the battle with the living dead, Fang Zheng realized that the combat power in the real Dark World was completely different from that in the game. To put it bluntly, the game experience in the eyes of rich players and non-rich players was too different. The weak living dead in the game that didn't fight back had the strength and defense of a tyrant in reality. On the other hand, these cultists that were supposed to be easily bullied were no less than top-notch warriors. Or was it that he was playing on nightmare difficulty? As it turned out, these cultists weren't pushovers. After using the summoned monsters to form a human wall, they immediately raised their hands and chanted loudly. Then, fireballs shot from their hands at Fang Zheng. T. Looking at these scorching red fireballs, Fang Zheng cried out in his heart. He hurriedly rolled on the ground and hid on the other side of the platform. Following that, he heard a series of explosions, and the platform began to shake crazily. Hot air whizzed past Fang Zheng's body, and he even saw countless sparks flying in all directions, landing on the tables, chairs, and cupboards around the cellar. Soon, the entire cellar began to burn amidst the flames. For a time, thick smoke billowed, and hot air blew in his face. As far as the eye could see, he could only see a swaying bright red. Damn it! Why do cultists like to set fires? While enduring the billowing smoke, Fang Zheng could not help but complain in a low voice. At this time, the entire cellar was already a sea of fire, and the exit had been completely blocked. Now Fang Zheng had no way out. There were cultists in front of him, and a sea of fire behind him. And apart from Frostmourne, Fang Zheng did not have any useful items. He did not pick up anything good when he killed the living dead, and he was still wearing a militia suit. If he continued to be burned like this, only death awaited him. I can only fight. Thinking of this, Fang Zheng no longer hesitated. The cultists seemed to have a way to survive in this environment, but he could not bear it. Therefore, Fang Zheng decisively grabbed a piece of gravel and threw it in the direction of the cultists. Clang! It was unknown what the rock hit, but it produced a loud sound. At that moment, the cultists and the demonic creatures they summoned turned their heads to look in the direction of the sound. Upon seeing this scene, Fang Zheng's heart stirred. Now, just as the cultists shifted their attention, Fang Zheng stretched out his hand to press on the platform and jumped over. Then he raised Frostmourne and turned into a storm as he charged at the enemy in front of him. Soon, the shining holy light appeared again. With a loud bang, the hell monster in front of Fang Zheng flew backward. Fang Zheng took the opportunity to step forward, gripped Frostmourne, and stabbed the heart of the cultist behind the hell monster. He did not have the powerful ability of the Holy Army to directly turn into a human cannonball and charge in, so Fang Zheng could only choose the stupid method. Kill him! At this moment, Fang Zheng heard the roars of the cultists again. He hurriedly rolled on the ground and felt a burning sensation brushing past his back. With a loud bang, the cultist whose body Fang Zheng had pierced was hit by the flying fireball and exploded. Fang Zheng was also blown back by the airflow. How unlucky! At this moment, Fang Zheng felt a burning pain all over his body. He could even feel his shoulder going numb as if it was missing a piece. He could not even exert strength in his hands. He was also very depressed. His life was really bitter. He died in an accident in his previous life, and it wasn't easy for him to be reincarnated into this world. He was either being hunted down or surrounded. Who did he offend? Why did he fall into such a situation so easily? My grandma used to help me cross the road many times back then. You're blaming society for this little bit of bad luck. But now, Fang Zheng did not have the time to take revenge on society. He rolled over and tried to get up from the ground. But soon, Fang Zheng found that his right hand was not pressing on the ground, but on a hard stone slab carved with patterns. Found it! Fang Zheng's face lit up with joy. He hurriedly looked to his side and saw a teleportation circle carved from a stone slab next to him, emitting a dazzling light. This is it. Looking at the teleportation circle in front of him, Fang Zheng rolled on the ground without hesitation and lay down in the teleportation circle. The reason why he attacked the cultists was obviously not because he wanted both sides to suffer heavy losses. His only goal was the teleportation circle. As long as he could enter the teleportation circle, Fang Zheng would be able to leave this place and return to. Whoosh! What's going on? Fang Zheng looked around blankly. He remembered that he had just entered the teleportation circle, but before he could activate the teleportation passage to Tristram, the scene in front of him suddenly changed. The burning cellar disappeared, replaced by a dark, gloomy hall. Then, a woman's voice rang in Fang Zheng's ear. Who are you? Fang Zheng turned his head and looked in the direction of the voice. He saw a woman in revealing clothes with two butterfly-like insects lying on both sides of her body floating in the air, staring coldly at him. In front of her stood dozens of evil cultists in robes. Seeing this woman, Fang Zheng was speechless. Wasn't this the leader of the cultists and the culprit behind Deckard Cain's death? Magda?